Thanks for tuning into another episode of the MPAKT Podcast. I am your host, LBJ. I am super excited to introduce my guest for today, Daniel Smith. Daniel Smith is the founder of Keepingly. He's the host of the KeepWise podcast. He's a LinkedIn influencer talking all things Black business, Black tech, and Black entrepreneurship related. He's the author of several published articles, has been featured in a variety of other publications, including from companies including Fast Company, Medium, Venture Magazine, and more. He was in fact named an inspirational Black man in technology by Medium just last year in 2022. He's also last year he was named a real estate newsmaker by RIS Media. If you're unfamiliar with Keepingly, Keepingly is a platform that gives homeowners a single place to manage and keep records of their home services and expenses. So, Daniel, I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today. Welcome. How are you doing today?
Hey, Leonard. Thank you for having me. Thanks for all the kind words. As you're reading some of that, it's reflective to think of, where we were when we started this journey, as for me and some of the other persons on my team. So it's surreal a bit, but happy to be here, happy to have this opportunity to talk about things in technology, and let's do it, man.
Yeah, let's do it. So we're gonna get into the technology and Keepingly in a second, but I want to share a bit of your story. Where does the story of Daniel Smith start? Where are you originally from? What was your background? What was childhood like?
So I was born in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. I am the first of three kids. For me, we had a very interesting childhood. My parents were, disciplinarians, for me. And so, part of that was, hey, go to school, do your work, kind of thing. And, I would say, a lot of the grounding that we had as kids were really based on my parents, and the diligence, because my mom at a point in time was a teacher, then she moved careers. And so as a family, we were pretty tight knit in terms of, always being there for one another. Recently my dad died.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thanks. And, it was Christmas, actually, died on Christmas Day.
Wow.
So, getting that call, and saying, hey, he died, and then, having to, deal with, all of that. But, for the first time, I would say in 10 years, all my siblings and I were together. We'd see each other separately, but never, we would all in the same space for like a decade. So that had its own, moment. But, for me, really growing up, we were taught, to excel. We were taught to do our best. My dad, one of those stories that, I remember him fondly of, we thinking and reflecting, my dad would say, he's like, you'd go into school and, you'd be talking with teachers, and the teacher's like, hey, Daniel is such a good being. My dad was like, I didn't want to hear that. I just want to understand how he's doing in his school. He's like, I didn't want to behave at home. We just focus on. So that's kind of, the background that we keep on. So, and for me, start looking at how weak I got into technology. It was really, again, my parents were really super supportive of everything that we did. I did my first company at like 20.
Wow.
And I grew up in the space of, hey, we're coming into 2020, early 2000s, and so we started talking on websites, web development, and stuff like that. And so my parents, always had our backs. But in addition to building a business, I was still going to school full time, still trying to build a business on the side. I still got it all done. So really, I would tell people, hustling hard, even especially in my early 20s, to build a business, help it be successful, but also understand technology was kind of the grounding that's kind of where I came from.
Wow, that's incredible. So You mentioned you started your first business at 20. What was that first business? What was that like?
So our first business at 20 was web development. So we helped
Okay.
companies to build websites, build more, determine strategy. Really, we were all moving away from really post everything brick and mortar to a lot of things going online. So,
Yeah.
we helped companies transitions in the Caribbean. I worked with, some of the biggest entities from government organizations, airlines, um,
Yeah.
you know, schools, universities. I had kind of the gamut of clients, but, that still took a while to build because it takes you. And so, I tell people even around, if I parlay some of that into the conversations now around funding, when you're in your early 20s, you could take that hit. You could take, building from scratch. You can, especially if you're living in your parents' house and you don't have
Yeah.
responsibilities and kids. It's like, hey, yeah, let's just do it. Let's just, grind it out. Let's take the hit. I think that once you want to build something scalable, that's a totally different conversation. That
Yeah.
that requires a bit more intuition. It requires a bit more time to build a runway. And the cost of things have really come down on that side to build and scale. So the opportunities, I think that now where we are, it's life has really evolved, from a few years ago, in
Yeah.
the early 2000s to now.
Wow, that's incredible. So when you started your first business, I know you mentioned your parents are really on you about your academics. What was that first step like for them? Did they support your entrepreneurship endeavors early on, or were they like get a 9 to 5 work that?
No, well, the thing about it was when I started, it was really, I was still in school.
Yeah.
So it was just about really being able to
Mm,
balance school and,
yeah.
trying to build a business. Um,
Yeah.
and I remember, which to me, even when my dad died, one of the things that hit me about it, was just like all these memories that come flooding back. And I remember him, taking the time to, we started and out of our main business, we started like a incubator company. And one of those things is like he went around and he talked to people and he introduced people to what we were building and things. So he was like an integral part of a lot of,
That's incredible.
just what we were building. And then
Yeah.
so for me, once I was able to maintain my GPA and and for me, I think I was a pretty okay student, So I was never jumping below any GPAs or any.
Yeah.
My parents were pretty okay, in terms of that. So I think that and I realized once there were times, then okay, well, coming down to exam week or when you'd have a midterm, you just kind of characterize your time. So I don't think that it's any different from having a job while
Okay.
going to school. I just think
Yeah.
it really is about you being able to characterize your time and your focus. Other people, go different places. You work Starbucks, you get a job, you do something, Walmart or whatever. You see all these college kids, and so it's kind of the same thing. I just think, for me, it was just me building for myself,
Yeah.
company and kind of getting that experience, to learn to sell, to learn to build out a product, to learn to understand roadmaps, all those things
Yep.
that came with it.
That's awesome. So from the time you started that very first web development company to Keepingly, what was that in between? What happened in between that time?
So in between that time, I shut down a business.
Yeah.
I lost money. Uh, I switched over to the corporate side because part of my background, I somewhere in between building my business, I finished my bachelor's, did my MBA. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, yeah, well, time to do something. So I did a stint in telecom for approximately 5 years. Worked in product and digital strategy,
Yeah.
helped roadmap things around the Internet of Things, building out business cases. Then on the digital strategy side, moving customers from again brick and mortar to the digital side, moving a company from like 1 million to like 20 million payments in like 18 months. and helping them to be able to strategize and to be able to get their customers to really embrace the digital technology. And it was funny because right at the end of that, we just kind of went into COVID, and I'm like, man, if some of these institutions didn't make these moves, they would be sitting ducks at this point. So
Yeah.
that those that's kind of so the trajectory from time well from there to where we are now in terms of keeping it.
Yeah. And so earlier you mentioned you grew up in Trinidad and Tobago. When
Mhm.
did you move to the United States?
So I moved to Miami about in 2012, something like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so kind of in between that time.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So when did you get this initial idea for Keepingly?
So for keeping the idea really started, we were just like in the middle of the pandemic.
Mhm.
And for me, you're doing everybody's home. Everybody's
Yeah.
sitting around trying to figure out, okay, what happens now? And then, even around the task around your home, you're realizing, okay, certain things need to be done, or you don't want anybody in your house, anybody in your space. Some people actually doing renovations, so it's a kind of weird time. But for me,
Yeah.
what one of those things I started to think about was just my Internet of Things experience, and
Mm.
how when you're in technology, you love building technology for yourself, but it doesn't necessarily translate in terms of how we build products for customers and that end user. And part of
Yeah.
my time in telecom, what it taught me really on that consumer end is that consumers, the build that, and the roadmap that you have to have for customers is totally different from if you're working from a tech side itself. And so,
Mm.
just bridging that gap, customer onboarding, customer orientation,
Yeah.
understanding how to really do the things around making sure that you're engaging in customers. So for me, building out even on the social media side, understanding how to handle things like that. Those were
Yeah.
all experiences that I was able to build, and that because even in some of my side projects, I build, like building from 0 to 100, 50, 60,000 in terms of customers and social media and stuff like that, and understanding, okay, what engages customers, what doesn't. So trying to take all these experiences now, and even in terms of Keepingly, I started thinking about was like, the home ownership process and that journey feels pretty disjointed and
Right.
broken. Because for me, I was in my house for like a decade, and sometimes understanding, okay, what did we do? When did we do that? Where's the bill for that? Who did that? Who's the vendor? How much did it cost? And so,
Yeah.
and then realizing, even during the pandemic, realizing, what those things was like. Every vendor wants to be paid like 6 million ways. I'm like, geez, okay, this process is just feels really exhausting. And
Yeah.
so, part of that, so just even with how we were thinking of keeping it, we actually thought of it one way, and we ended up realizing, okay, for the home ownership process, it's a whole journey. So,
Mhm.
that was just my own experience, coming out of it. Part of it was really having that conversation with myself, doing surveys with other people,
Yeah.
understanding, okay, could this be a possible business? What does this look like? What should the actual home ownership experience be? And so that was just, the idea for Keepingly, in terms of, okay, yeah, we now are all mobile, we all have these devices. How are we using it in the home ownership process? So that was the birth of Keepingly in my mind, and then it looked different. It looked different rolling out, but yeah, that has been what we've experienced as well.
That's awesome. So you had this initial idea. What was that first step for you?
I would say for me, doing research, because I wanted to understand, okay, is this what happens next? I was, midway between thinking of, doing more telecom roles, thinking about, okay, yeah, what does this look like? Do I move back or do I take remote roles, working on
Mhm.
telecoms, in the Caribbean and stuff like that, or do I look, because I'm in Miami, and then it's just like, okay, yeah, what does this look like? So, part of that initial stuff was like, okay, is this a viable opportunity here? What does the competition look like? What does this market segment look like, and how can we possibly make inroads? And because
Mhm.
I, number one, have business experience, but also because I have that my MBA, my mind always thinks of, okay, how does this look like market segmentation, this analysis, that analysis, how
Yeah.
can we possibly make inroads? How can we, be that voice to attract customers and stuff like that. So that was kind of step one. And then step two was really, okay, what does this look like if we build a product? Because that for me is the easy part, because
Right.
I live in tech. I have like multiple options for me, because I'm not necessarily technical lately. I don't code to save my life. So, initially I started off, knowing how to code and stuff like that. And then I kind of switched fully to the business side. So there's no more, okay, you're a technical anything lately in my but I can't, do from the product side, know how to do sprints, know how to manage that, to do product road mapping, understand exactly, okay, this is the life cycle of where we are in this product, or what are the functionalities and the features. So that's kind of one of the other steps I took, was looking at,
Mhm.
okay, what does this product roadmap look like if we start building up? What should be the first thing we do? And how does that translate? What should the user experience feel like? So those were some of the my brand new steps jumping into this, and thinking, okay, and then and also doing surveys. So that was one of those things that we kind of did to validate, and because sometimes you have to validate your own thought process in this whole building exercise,
Absolutely.
make sure that it's not just you hearing yourself, or um, your ego getting in the way of what you're building, or
Yeah.
what the business opportunity is. So I kind of took some of those steps and kind of stepped back and say, okay, this is a Daniel thing, but can it be this a marketing? Would it be embraced? How should we look at it? So those for me were some of the steps that we initially took.
Yeah. I have several questions out of that I want to ask. But the first one, so you mentioned you had your MBA, and you also mentioned like you've kind of transitioned from the technical side to more of the business side of entrepreneurship. For the young entrepreneur who's kind of on the fence about, is an MBA, like, do I go back to school, get this MBA, and then launch my business, or do I go without it first? You've been on both sides. You started your first one in undergrad, and now you're starting Keepingly with MBA under your belt. What advice do you have for that entrepreneur? What's the impact there?
Um, so I would say, it really depends on what you want out of it. For me, I that argument or that conversation really dissects two ways. Number one, understand that you can see the Zucks, you can see the Gates, you can see all these guys of these worlds, but understand that what these guys all have, even the Bezos, etc., um, they all have networks.
Mm,
And so that is one of those critical aspects that we try to underplay, because even for me, I would tell people, and you mentioned my fast company. For me,
yeah,
um, growing up, or not growing up, but in my undergrad, I would read all those magazines, Forbes, Fortune,
yeah,
Fast. I can show you my shelf with a lot of these magazines in it.
yeah,
And so what if you're looking at the tech journalism side, the story that we sold is that, hey, you don't necessarily need a undergrad, you don't need an MBA, you don't need these things to make it. You just need to, have a great product idea. But the thing that they don't tell you is that, or they don't like to emphasize as much. If you take the case of Zuck and Facebook, ultimately Microsoft invested in Facebook at a
yeah,
really early on period.
Yeah.
do you have those Harvard connections and relationships to be able to do that? And so for me, I would say, if you have the relationships and you have the network and don't need to go to school, then fine. But I think that
Mm.
school is also that socializing ground. So, for me now, even before I, started back in entrepreneurship, getting roles in corporate, it was like pick up the phone and friends who was like, hey, I had this role, what do you think about it? Would you? And so that's what, having those relationships and those
Yeah.
networks give you. And you get it over time. But if you're young, and unless you're getting into a YC, which, again, is about the network,
Yep.
and about the relationship, in addition to now is the 500K that they're giving. I think
Yeah.
that it is, the education that you have never goes away.
Mm.
And if you, and to me, learning is also a lifelong process. So I don't knock having the MBA. And for me, I didn't necessarily pay all that much for it. So,
Yeah.
but if you have to pay for it and you're paying for one of those higher ed schools, you actually have to. I would say you do the cost analysis and figure out, okay, what does this look like, and what is the return on the investment that I'm trying to get out of this.
That's great.
But for me, I embrace having it because I think that ultimately it made me a better critical thinker.
Hmm.
And also I was in my late 20s when so for me, comparing to myself to some of the people in my class who were a lot younger, didn't have the
Yeah.
life experience, didn't build a business, didn't do XYZ. I could just say, I think that for me, what I'd say is having a better experience under your belt before you do an MBA gives you that lift in terms of, okay, you're not just walking into class, okay, I just want to get an A, but you're walking into class in terms of how can I apply this situationally to make
That's great.
this better? Or if I see this scenario, how do I? So really scenario planning, scenario matching, those kinds
Yeah.
of things, I think gives you that kind of competitive advantage in terms of how you're able to approach it.
That's great. That's great. You mentioned Microsoft was one of the early investors in Facebook.
Mhm.
I saw a recent article. I saw a recent article you shared on LinkedIn, reporting I think is less than 1% of all venture capital funding last year went to Black founders. As when you launched Keepingly, one, did you seek venture funding, but also, as you know, like I'm actively in the VC space right now myself, and I'm wrestling with conversations on what is how can venture cap. So maybe this is two questions, but the second question there is, what is, in an ideal world, if Black founders are receiving more funding, what's the impact that you'd like to see? So the first question there, did you seek VC funding yourself to launch Keepingly? And then two, what's the impact, like in an ideal world, what's the impact that VC funding can have on founders who look like you and me?
Okay, so the first question is some of it I ponied up from out of pocket. So
Yeah.
then I've done more angel than CVC. If
I love that.
I have, but we've also spoken to approximately 70 to 80 VCs, and have
Okay.
said, oh, you're too early for us.
Hmm.
So, it's like, yeah, okay. So we've had the conversations.
Yeah.
And so I think it's 2% or near 2% went to
Okay.
Black founders. I think under 2% went to Black women, which
Okay.
is that whole new kind of worms that we start there.
Yeah.
But I think that yeah, ultimately, so we can't. I think that the conversation is a no-brainer, number one, in terms of
Mhm.
funding more Black founders. I think that goes without saying. I don't even see you can't give a group that has been the most historically disadvantaged group less than 2% of funding of anything, and then
Yeah.
to say, oh well, we've tried to bridge the gap. I mean, I don't even
Yeah.
understand how, even if we're trying to have a conversation, because I know there are those proponents who like to talk about, meritocracy, XYZ, all those very idealistic conversation.
Yeah.
Nowhere can we give one group less than 2% of funding and think that we're doing the best. That is like me telling my kid, hey, well, you only need to try 2% and to get 100% in your exam. It doesn't work like that. So I think that all the proponents of that, but then we if we're being honest about some of these conversations, you realize that some of this is systemically inbuilt into the system. Some is built to prioritize one group above everybody else, and some just goes back to plain old networks and where people feel the most comfort. So if you went to Harvard with you, or if you're a Harvard alum, or Princeton or Yale or one of those Ivy Leagues, I would think that you are more worthy of the investment because you went to an Ivy League school. And that's, I mean, and that is also people's own biases that actually are impacting how they invest. And why I can't say I fought them for it, because we all come with our inherent biases as human beings. I do think that there needs to be intentional structuring around these things. One of those terms that I came up with over the pandemic was called performative posturing. And it was really about all these organizations, I guess, in the wake of George Floyd, making a lot of statements and saying, these are the things that we would do as organizations. This is the amount of money we pledge. Okay, so let's start 2 years later, we're in 2023 now, 3 years later, start looking and seeing, okay, this one said 500 million, this one said this one. How much of that has actually been distributed? And now we're in a state of, we're in a pandemic, we're in a, I would say we're near recession, considering everything that's happening. How much of those initiatives will be followed up, will be carried through, and how do we hold organizations accountable? And so when we start looking in the VC space also, I think that it's really critical, because it may be Daniel Smith today, but then it may be somebody else who has, the groundbreaking technology. I think that recently I shared the story of the guys who build them Block Power, and even coming out of the SVB collapse, how he was on a plane trying to make sure he could move money, and and for me that was like, dude, this dude is number one, he's bearing his soul. That's that level of vulnerability, but also. Think about, I think that maybe a month ago they did 150 mil in terms of, between debt and equity. And I'm like, dang. So you're feeling happy in the one moment. And that's how entrepreneurship is. You're feeling happy in the one moment, but a few weeks later, and then it's like, okay, crap, I need to scramble to make sure that I'm surviving. And so I think that there's for Black founders, there's also this weight of expectation upon us. There isn't necessarily the room to fail. There isn't always the room to give you that sort of, okay, well, this is the way you should think about, or this is what you should try. I mean, if you're in the circles and you have those VC relationships around you to back you up, then but sometimes it's like flying blind. And I would say that even, some of those conversations which you have with VCs could be disingenuous, because they tell you, oh well, you're too early for us, but we know people who get funding with papers and napkins and not even products. And so for me, it's just not, I'm not even asking, well, it needs to be, okay, well, fund us a napkin on products, but sometimes you see the shifting goalposts. So sometimes it's like, okay, well, you need traction. Well, I've gotten some customers, I've gotten some revenue. Oh, well, you're still not there for us. And you see these shifting goalposts. And I'm like, hey, if we're talking about meritocracy, let's talk about standardization of what this looks like. Because in one round, you hear this is a seed, this is a pre-seed, this is a Series A, but depending on who you are and what you've built, that looks totally different. So all of those
Wow.
kinds of things, I think, are really important that we ensure that we're having conversations where we put equality on the table, because whether or not Leonard is black, Daniel is white, Daniel is green, Indian, Chinese, whatever his color, he should have or be afforded similar. And not only because of, okay, well, this is who I know. If it's who I know, it makes it easier to have a conversation. But if I'm
Yeah.
meeting the mark, then therefore it's like, okay, why am I not meeting the mark? And in some of these cases, I remember talking to somebody who's like, oh, well, we don't think that you have certain things worked out yet. And I'm like, okay, but I thought that was where you're supposed to be helping me get there. So in some of the, these conversations, they want a built-in, baked-in product, depending on the stage that you are. And I think that some of those conversations really, we kind of need to figure out, as an industry, how do we get to make sure that we have more Black founders in this funnel?
Yes, I love everything that you just said. Thank you for that. And I'm gonna go back to keep you in a second, but on that note, while we're on this, one thing that I've thought about. So for me, I'm the first in my family I'm first gen college student, but also first to kind of go into the tech space. In your opinion, what is the impact that technology can have on the Black community, and not just in the United States. In a couple episodes, I'm bringing it on an entrepreneur who's doing some work over in on the African continent. But in your opinion, what's the impact that the technology can have on the global Black community?
I think that again, it's a no-brainer. For me, because I started in technology so young, and that was even before I think that I got my first computer at like 50. So for me, I remember, dial-up internet. You're old enough to remember those songs.
Those are my earliest days of internet. I was young, but
thank you very much. And so part of for me in really getting indoctrinated and understanding the power, I think that technology changes the world. And I think that we have an opportunity with technology to have a seat at the table and help make technology that impacts and benefits our lives. One of the things I've realized, even in working on the social media aspect, it's amazing how transformative, things like Facebook, IG, TikTok, all these things, have been. And one of the problems that I have is that we are so influential and impactful in making a lot of these platforms not only functional, but in terms of how much revenue they generate, so actually making money for them.
Yeah.
And then when you look around the seat at the table of who is represented, you hardly see people like us in the C-suites and represented on an executive level. Which is one of those problems. I fundamentally have a problem with that, because I think that, hey, here's what we influence culture, we drive culture, we impact culture, yet give us seats at the table. And so I think that technology has the power to, from everything, if we look back to the pandemic, we look at supply chains, how those things were impacted. Well, moving people from bricks and mortar to, being in everything happening online, from payments to some people had more Amazon boxes in their houses than anything else. And trust me, it's not even only here. I remember being in the Caribbean. I see some of my friends and family, have more Amazon boxes than I had. I'm like, whoa, why do you have more Amazon boxes than me? But so
Yeah.
technology is global, and it has transformed, the way we live our lives. Even if I
Mhm.
interacted with my child, I realized, part of that conversation is she's like so indoctrinated into technology because it's all around her, and whether or not we want to, because I'm like one of those parents, I'm like, yeah, you're not getting a phone until you're way high, way high school. I'm not giving a kid a phone. So that's me personally,
Yeah.
because I need to be able to to restrict what you have access to, and
Mhm.
make sure that I try to keep you, because I don't, I have a phone, I understand exactly all the things that comes up there. So now I'm giving it to a kid and empowering that kid. But on the flip side, my daughter just saw something on YouTube, and she's like, "Hey, Daddy, you were there. You want this podcast? Like, you this person on your podcast, stuff like that." And so, for her, thinking about, okay, what is my possible career? Where can I do? What can I?
Mm.
How do I get information? A lot of their information, we had encyclopedias. Now they have YouTube. So YouTube is their new
Yeah.
encyclopedia. And so I do think that technology has a marvelous opportunity for us to transform, but we have to be thinking about it in those very strategic manners. Because
Mhm.
sometimes we think about it, oh well, this is entertainment. Well, here's what: Facebook is a billion-dollar company. They don't only view this as
That's
entertainment.
great.
They bought
That's
IG
great.
1.2 whatever billion when they bought it, and now it's worth whatever. It's not only entertainment. So we have to really become very strategic. TikTok, I know they're in Congress, talking about whether or not we should ban TikTok. All the details that we give about ourselves and our person, from a security standpoint, part of those things. How do we ensure that we are up to date? Because even with this new slew of firings that we have, and let cuts and let goes, how do we use these opportunities to make ourselves as a population relevant in the conversation, and having a seat at the table of what happens next in technology? And
That's
I think
great.
that's where we have to start thinking very strategically, um, about our place in technology. It's nice to do the TikTok moves. It's nice to sit and be entertained. But I would prefer to see us being paid. I prefer to see us having a lot more equity and stocks, and decision making power at those tables.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you for that. All right, so now I'm gonna bring it back to one of my earlier questions on Keeping Lee. So I know last year your team launched the official pilot for the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier you mentioned you would consider yourself a non-technical founder. How did you go about kind of building a tech platform as a non-technical founder?
So that's where understanding technology comes in, I would
Yeah.
say. Because I was so for me, what we kind of outsourced some of it, and so I found really good persons who had a background in some of what we were doing. They understand the problem, and
The
so
power of the network you were talking about earlier.
exactly. And so part of that was me road mapping. Though I knew exactly what I wanted.
Mm.
And then what we did is, really get an advice from one of those VCs who I speak with, on a constant basis. It was like, hey, Daniel, don't just go and get a tech team, get a product person. So we kind of stepped back and started thinking about, okay, product. And so connected with somebody who did product. And so that was more of the UX, UI kind of um, road mapping that we needed to do. But for me, I always knew what the experience should be, because it was kind of built off of my own experience and just talking to other people.
Yeah.
And then, doing some early testing with some people, getting their feedback, what they think it should, do and stuff like that. So I would say for me, just having a tech background, understanding, okay, and then I've managed tech teams, so much in my life, so many projects I did. I was the project lead. So, from
Yeah.
creating proposals to user tested to UX UI. Okay, this doesn't look good here. Move it there. Okay, let's test this. And so for me, I've also worked on multiple time zones. So whether or not I had a team in India or Nigeria or
Yeah.
stateside or even in the Caribbean, I had multiple networks to tap into. And so it wasn't necessarily that difficult because I had some of the background, but I would say
Yeah.
um, having that vision was actually what kind of helped make it easier. And even now, where we are in terms of understanding, we still have to go and iterate after version one. And then also, I would say that's just the tech side. And then I spent like a lot of last year dealing with the policy side because coming into housing and the real estate market, I did not understand how heavily policy based uh,
Mm.
the housing industry was. And so
Yeah.
connecting with one of my advisors, and then I started going down a totally different rabbit hole, which was like, I'm getting my mind blown because of all the things, and even that Fast Company article, part of me was really sitting on the policy side and understanding, okay, what's a special purpose credit program in housing? How can we use that to talk about home ownership sustainability? And how do we ensure that, the customer experience and the homeowner experience evolves? Because it's not just about buying a house or getting people into houses. No, it's about getting them in houses and helping them build generational wealth, helping them to stay in those houses, help them to be able to track everything that they've done. So at the end of the day, they're able to say, okay, this is my most valuable asset, and
Mm.
therefore these are all the things. And then when you start thinking about it just from the standpoint of, your home is your most valuable asset, and
Yeah.
how you know the policies are constructed around those things. For me, I got a whole new baptism that was way outside the scope of tech. So, even one of my advisors says, no, he's like, yo, you're a policy wonk. You're just like a policy head because I'm reading every day about something in the housing industry. I'm understanding exactly what should go on. But also for me, connecting the dots in terms of how we um, position our product and how we are able to really help the average user who doesn't necessarily think about it going in, because we
Yeah.
all have the euphoric feeling of, my house is my most important asset. Oh, no, we actually have the euphoric feeling of, yeah, well, I just want a house and I want to be a homeowner. Whoopee. And we're going to talk about, okay, well, what does it cost to live there? Yeah. What does your emergency repairs look like? I mean, as a country, we're averaging somewhere around $30 billion in emergency repairs per year because we don't do proper maintenance in our house. So it's like,
Yeah.
Ah, yeah, but those are the things that we hear. We hear the really nice stories. So we're hoping to bridge some of that in what we're building at Keeping.
That's incredible. I can't wait to use the platform. I mentioned last year my wife and I bought our house. And within 2 months of being in the house, we had a fire on our deck. So I was like, okay, like this is
Wow.
not what I anticipated as part of this process. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
I
those
can't
things,
wait.
and those things those things could really leave you scarred and jaded, depending on what
Yeah,
your expectations were. And sometimes we just move on. But the thing about it is like, you had to do that deck, how do you
yeah,
document for that? What does this look like before and after? What does insurance tell you? How much is it going to cover? And so those are some of the questions that we as a company started having to ask, even on my podcast, my co-host, she had a fire in
yeah,
her kitchen and she tells her story. And her story was one of those gut wrenching stories for me personally. And I was
yeah.
like, geez, this is what this is like. So it I think that it changes you, but also I think that what we're building really is about empowering you so that at the end of the day your experience end to end, from the moment you close to the moment you do decide to do whatever, um it is worthy of documentation, and it is worthy of helping you to have a better journey as a homeowner.
Absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned your podcast, the Keep Wise podcast.
Yeah.
As we begin to wrap up, I'd love for you to share a bit about the podcast with our listeners.
So our podcast is focused on the whole home ownership journey. So
Yeah,
we had some really influential guests, from like National Association of Realtors. We had one of our first guests was Dr. Vanessa Perry. She is um, a professor over at Georgetown, and she spent a lot of years, and she has a fascinating story about why she got involved in this work. And so
Yeah.
when you start understanding, what that experience is, we want to make sure that we bring to life what that home ownership experience is and giving people the tools so people may not understand, okay, why is data important in this home ownership journey?
Mm.
And what our latest episode really talks about that, looking at trends, because trends help you to understand, okay, these are the things that I need to be doing if I want to get this valuation on my house. But also, these are the
Yeah.
things that I need to be thinking of, where the market is going, what happened historically. Because even for me, I just wrote an article talking about how SVB collapse is going to impact home ownership. And it is instructional in terms of how we need to be thinking of it. And so what we want to do with our podcast is help homeowners to be able to get into that mindset and that framing. Hey, this is an asset. And I need to manage my house like an asset. When you see only 3% of minority homeowners refinance in the last in 2000 in the 2020 21 when rates were
Wow.
at historical lows, you realize that if you didn't know that you should have refied or taken those actions, you lost out. How much money did some people lose out by? I don't know. But here's what
Wow.
rates are at 7% today. So think about the average homeowner getting a 3% rate or 2 point something rate versus 7% now. And they realize it's a world of difference in terms of what those percentages look like.
Yeah.
So we're really about empowering homeowners and home buyers, because we also know that 5 million people want to become homeowners in the next 5 years, or that time period now. And we're also in a cycle in the market where we're facing abundant shortages of supply. So for us, it's really about helping people to understand and to be able to navigate the market so that they're able to have the best experience with as little buyer's remorse as possible.
Wow. Yeah. I can't wait to add that to my playlist of my podcast. I didn't know that about 3% of minority homeowners refinanced. That's millions lost out in our community.
Billions. I'm sure
Yeah.
it's billions. I'm sure it's billions.
Yeah.
Just think about it. If your average saving on a loan is like $800, think about $800 per month by 12,
Yeah.
and then multiply that by all the people who didn't refi, who didn't know how to refi, or
Wow.
their banks, or I heard stories. There was another interesting statistic that I noticed that which says that homeowners or home buyers take usually the first offer that they've given. And I'm like, what? So people don't even negotiate. People don't go get
Wow.
opinions. And I'm like, okay, are people, but I have to console myself. Is like, hey, Daniel, you just one course away from having an MBA in finance. So therefore, you may take things a bit different from just the average person who doesn't understand this. But that's nuts.
Yes.
You need to negotiate. You need to play one against the other so that you can make sure that you're getting the best rate. And I think that
Yeah.
these things are like supposed to be like pretty common sense. But hey, it's just like, but you know what I realized even in the whole home ownership experience is you don't know what you don't know, and so therefore it's about educating people so that they know to make better decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what does 2023 look like for Keepingly, for Daniel, for the Keepwise podcast? What does this year look like for you?
So for the Keepwise podcast, our objective is to bring more great guests to the table,
Yeah.
have some fantastic conversations so that we could continue to empower home owners along their home ownership journey. For Keepingly, our objective is to launch out of a pilot to a more formalized launch, and to be able to roll out some iterations and some upgrades to our platform. Also hoping to raise some funding from guys like Leonard so that we can continue to grow our platform, but also really getting some great partnerships on board.
Yeah.
That is one of those things. We do believe that as an ecosystem, we have the opportunity to help both realtors, brokers, builders, everybody in this cycle to be able to maintain better relationship with homeowners.
Yeah.
And then for me, really, I don't know, I'm getting more gray, so I'm just hoping to continue to live and continue to, build out along our journey. And for good health. I mean, I can't predict the future, so, but for me, just trying to keep in shape, read more, continue to be an advocate for the wins and continue to point out the injustices, because we need to have a more balanced, equitable conversation, and also to continue to be a parent to my kids. So yeah,
that's incredible. Has it hit you yet? And what I mean by that is, you are an inspiration to young entrepreneurs, to the younger generation of tech workers, prospective entrepreneurs like myself. You're doing some incredible things. You're a Black CEO of your tech company. You're running your podcast. You're building the network. You're literally influencing thousands of people, if not millions, with all the different things you're doing. Have you taken that in yet?
I tried to, it was funny that question, because I was having this conversation with my daughter today, and I was saying to her, for me, I would say I'm kind of more humble about it. And I tend not to, and sometimes you have to take stock of what you're doing, but because I continue to just do, a family member said to me recently, I don't know how you do it all. And I'm like, I don't have time to stop and think about it. I just have to do it. So in the ways that I am able to impact others, I am thankful for the opportunity. Happy to continue to have these conversations. But for me, I don't think that my story is complete until we get that win, and until we're able to say, hey, I've built end to end. Because for me, I think one of the gutting feelings sometimes is, I mean, for me, I just experienced that, in December, and mid-January coming up, because death, funeral, everything, and that kind of weighed on me a bit. And I realized, despite what we may do when you leave the only thing that you have is the memories, and it's how you impact people's lives. So for me, taking all of that on board, I'm just happy that I'm able to influence, because sometimes, I don't know how other people feel, but there was this point in my life I was doing pretty okay. I was in my mid-20s, and it was like my grade would come around, and I'm like, why do I feel like I'm not doing enough? Why do I feel like I'm not accomplishing enough? Maybe it's because some people's like, yeah, you're type A personality, so I'm like, something feels like I should be doing more. And so sometimes I console myself, hey, I'm a parent, I'm doing as much as I could around my kid, trying to influence, trying to be a good person. And then, and from a tech perspective, really being able to say, okay, well, I want to build, I want to be able to influence, but I also want to impact. And I think that those are the things that I look at, and in any way that I could, and have these conversations and inspire people. It is what it is, and I'll just continue to do it. And hopefully, I think that whoever is influenced, because I didn't set out to become an influencer on LinkedIn, But for me, I was just really one of those things. I remember growing up, I was kind of a history buff, and one of those things is,
Yeah.
if you want to hide something from people, sometimes just keep information away from them. And so I just like, okay, the information is out there, the information is free, but because people don't necessarily want to look, or people don't know where to look, or people don't necessarily want to read, at least in a platform they can see it all there. So
Yeah.
um, I think that that's kind of where I sit, and hoping that we all take the time to do research, be inspired, because we have examples all around us. I am just one person who is doing my little bit to the world, but there's so many others, and community, I think, also helps you see, well, if you think you're doing great, if you must be in a room with other people doing greater things than you, to help you realize, okay, well, yeah, there's more I could do. I should be thinking of it this way, because we're never the smartest person in any room. And if
Hmm.
you're the smartest person in any room, that's saying you're in the wrong room. So that's just kind of how I look at it, and making sure that I can help others wherever I can.
That's incredible. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. I back in January, what you said made me think of back in January. I don't know if you're a basketball fan, but LeBron passed like Kareem's
Mhm.
all-time scoring record.
And
And
I'm a Lakers fan too.
okay, same here. His wife Savannah, at the after party, one thing that stood out to me, she was like, you're doing great. I know you're like still working for the championship, but take a moment to like understand like the impact that you've already made. So I like leave those as closing words to you. Like like I said, you're an inspiration to me as a younger person in tech, younger prospective entrepreneur, all of that. And I know you'll be an inspiration to the listeners who are listening to this as well. My final question for you, what advice do you leave for prospective entrepreneurs?
Um, just go do it.
Yeah.
I just be like that Nike slogan, just do it.
Yeah.
It and the reason why I say that is you have to take the swing, you have to feel, you have to iterate, you have to what you don't want to die with is regret. That's one of
Mhm.
those things. And
Yeah.
so I think that if you have an idea, um, see where it lands you. You could be the next $1 billion entrepreneur. You could
Yeah.
be a small mom and pop shop. But the thing about it is, I would say, just go take a swing and do what you're inspired to do. Because I think that what I've realized is that more than anything, ideas change the world. And having that passion for what you're doing, and how it may influence the world, is paramount to who we are and us living in our fullest selves.
Mm.
So for me, I just think that you go out and you do it. You may fail, and failure isn't bad. Failure, and that's one of the things I think that even in our community, the Black community, we
Yeah.
just be honest about that. We try to demonize failure a lot. We tend not to give people the room to feel. One of the things that I've realized, even in white entrepreneurship, even if we talk about, Adam Newman, we were guy, and to some people he was a failure. To him, he's not, and to Andreessen Horowitz, who just give him what 350 million.
Yeah.
So we have to give ourselves room to feel, um, and sit in your failure sometimes, because for me, I feel, whether it's exams, whether it's my business, whether or not it's a deal blowing up, whether or not this person we hoping to call us back who never calls back, all of those things feels like failures. Trust me, and it happens every day. So it's not that every day, like today I had a great day, I had two fantastic calls. Tomorrow it might be depressing.
Yeah.
But you know what? It doesn't stop me from waking up and doing the best that I can be or need to
Mm.
do. And so that's what I think. You know, don't worry if you listen to somebody like Gary Vee. You know, just like go do it. You have how much more years of your life? If you're a young entrepreneur, just go do it. So I think that
Yeah.
it is instructive. You know that just taking a swing, even how little, and even and also if I would say having the people around you. For me, I was pretty fortunate that my parents were just really instrumental in terms of everything that myself and my siblings wanted to do. uh,
Yeah.
but even if you find your tribe, find your ecosystem who helps you, because one of those things you realize in entrepreneurship is that your ecosystem, um, SVB can collapse if the ecosystem wasn't all talking about pulling out money. And so
Yeah.
you realize how powerful an ecosystem and a network is. Those people who got their money out knew exactly what was going on or knew exactly to pull their money out. Those who didn't clearly weren't that plugged into the network. So,
Yeah.
those are the things that you realize, okay, as an entrepreneur, and if I'm going to do this, who can I talk to? Who would have my
Mm.
back? Who would, support me on this journey? And I think that that's one of those things that I realize is critical in terms of the whole experience.
That's amazing. My final words, where can people find you if they want to get connected with you, Daniel?
Oh boy, they can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Okay. I'll
That,
link it in the show notes so people can find it easy.
yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on I think I'm on IG, I'm on Facebook, but I don't use those as much as
Okay.
I use my LinkedIn, because again, for professional purposes and just for
Yeah.
being able to have. I find a lot of my serious conversations happen on LinkedIn. Though I'm
Yeah.
try to be muted sometimes because people don't like to be offended sometimes. Not like I'm trying to offend people. I'm just trying to, hey, have a serious conversation. So
Yeah.
but that's one of the ways, and also you can connect on Keeping Me and we'll find them. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Daniel, for being a guest on the MPAKT Podcast. This was an incredible conversation. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thank you for having me, man.